we had this reporting about Senator Schumer, right, who said yesterday, "I'm with Joe." He said it 3 times. Senator Welch is now saying Biden should leave. Senator Blumenthal says he's concerned. He's expressing some doubts. We know that senators are going to meet, Democratic senators are planning to meet tomorrow at a lunch meeting. They're going to meet with Biden campaign advisors, is my understanding, Mike Donnellan, Steve Ricchetti, who's a counselor to the president, and Jen O'Malley Dillon. What is going on here?
This is sort of Senate Democrats trying to figure out how to handle this emerging situation. And look, Senate Democrats had their first lunch yesterday, their first time huddling as a group since that debate performance. And sources said that the majority of Democrats in that room said that President Biden would lose to former President Trump come November. Now, there's a caveat there, Simone. They didn't say that he should step down. So then sort of the question was, well, if you're sending in your nominee to a race that you're saying is the most consequential race in modern history, and you believe they're going to lose, what's that calculus? How does that work? Now, we sort of saw Peter Welch today break through that and say, you know, I don't think President Biden should be the nominee. Now, of course, the key question is, will we see more Democrats follow suit? People like John Tester, people like Sherrod Brown.
People in battleground races.
Exactly. Will we see them follow Peter Welch's way and calling him to step down? You know, an open question right now. But if they think that he's going to lose in November and they're going to send him into that race, how could Democrats say that they really need to win it?
I also want to discuss your reporting about Speaker Emerita and Nancy Pelosi. The rank and file of the Democratic Party, particularly members of Congress, they do still look to her. They listen to her, her guidance. Her comments on Morning Joe this morning, very big,
yes,
huge. They're raising a lot of questions. Was this a premeditated, some may call it attack, I would say comments?
Look, Nancy Pelosi, since the debate, since we've been back in the Capitol, has been asked time and time again, every single day, you think Biden should be the nominee? Is he the best person to carry the Democratic message? And any other variation of that question that you could think of. I spoke to Nancy Pelosi yesterday. I asked her, do you still support President Biden? She says, I always support the president. I said, do you think that he's the best person to be the Democratic nominee? She said, I'm not commenting on that right now. When I have a statement to say, I'll come out and say it. Then she was scheduled to come on to Morning Joe. So she knew that she was going to be peppered with this question. She knows that Morning Joe is a show that President Biden watches, that has been reported. I think that she came in here strategically. Also, let's note something about Nancy Pelosi. She is a tactical lawmaker. She is ruthless in wanting to win. She has led the House Democratic Caucus through a number of wins in recent years, her nearly 2-decade term being leader of the House Democrats. One thing that her colleagues know, she chooses her words very carefully.
I mean, along those lines then, Eugene, I mean, today, Pelosi said Biden needs to, quote, make up his mind about the future of his campaign. As our colleague Jonathan Lemire noted in that interview, he has said multiple times that he is, in fact, running. Despite the backlash, Pelosi's close to him. What does it suggest to you?
It suggests that they're not taking yes for an answer, right? Like you know, my husband's from the Midwest, so I sort of learned a little bit about passive aggressiveness, which is what they're saying to him is, we don't like your answer, but we're going to be nice about it, right? They don't want to be seen as pushing him out, at least where we are right now. He's at NATO. She talked about that. Let's see what happens after NATO, even though after NATO they're going to be on recess. And so what they're saying, they're continuing saying is they want him to come to this at his own pace. And what advisors of Biden will tell you, current and former, is that the outside pressure does not work on Joe Biden.
I can attest to that.
You might know something about that. But coming to him in meetings, private interactions, that works on him. He's not someone who wants to be humiliated. You can't push him to do something he doesn't want to do. And they keep saying, as she said it right there, that she wants him to make up his mind. He's made up his mind. The question is whether or not the leaders of the party, Democrats that are going to meet with him tomorrow in this Senate meeting, whether or not they're
meet with his campaign advisors, because he won't be in the meeting, yeah.
But like, are going to tell them he needs to go. If they're not going to say that at this point, what I'm hearing, and you guys are probably hearing from other Democrats, is, well, then you're just weakening him. If you're not going to make an actual decision, if you're not going to push him off the ticket, which is going to be very difficult to actually do, then you are weakening him. Why didn't you come on Monday with an actual plan? If they had a whole week. And if you look at how Biden's team handled this, that week was free for them to for Democrats to get together and make a plan, because the Biden folks were moving a little bit too slow, really, if we're being honest here.
Tyler, you have been reporting on this as well, particularly the down ballot impact of frankly, I think we can call it a debacle, the debate debacle fallout. We are now 2 weeks almost post that debate. What is your reporting telling you, and what are you hearing from rank and file Democrats, voters, but also the White House?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember that Joe Biden was trailing Donald Trump before the debate.
Yeah.
And these House and Senate candidates were far outperforming the president in some of these key Senate races, as well as competitive House races across the country. And Democrats have been optimistic that they have the opportunity to retake control of the House in November. So I think that's the table stakes for this conversation. We are now hearing from House and Senate Democrats that the gap has widened even more, and Joe Biden is a drag on many Democrats in their races come November. And so what we know about politicians is that ultimately they're about self-preservation. And as they see Biden continue to drag them down, they are not going to stand for that anymore. And to the conversation that we've been having, privately, many House and Senate Democrats say Biden cannot remain at top of the ticket. It's just not sustainable. They fear he's going to lose to Donald Trump, but also that Democrats will lose control of the House and the Senate, giving a potential President Trump a trifecta in Washington.
Here, can I just follow up on that and I'll start with you, Tyler. I have heard the same from these elected officials privately. What is their plan B? Because it is 118 days until Election Day, less than that until people actually start casting ballots. I've met the Democrats. I used to work for them. I don't know if they're as orderly and strategic as these fantasy plays that people are talking about are. So what is the plan B that you're?
So I think it's important to note what Eugene said, that Biden does not respond well to public pressure. So I think there was a private hope that Joe Biden would come to this decision on his own. Clearly, that is not the case. He is more defiant than ever. His aides, his family are saying he is not dropping out of this race. So I think what they're also waiting for now, we've heard privately from members in both the House and the Senate, is for NATO to conclude. I think they do not want to embarrass the president on the world stage. He is leading the NATO summit. There are major foreign policy issues to engage with. That summit ends tomorrow. And so I think we have heard privately from donors as well as House and Senate Democrats that there could be a renewed flood of calls for him to step aside Friday heading into the weekend.
Michael, let's just say if the president stays in the race, which by all accounts he is, because he said he is.
That's his decision.
That's his decision right now.
Delegates.
He is, and they are his. I think that is important. They are his delegates. There are about a little over 4,000 delegates to the Democratic National Convention. Joe Biden has nearly 4,000 of them, a little over 3,600. You need about 2,000 to be the nominee. The math is not mathing, but stranger things have happened. Okay, we are where we are right now. He does face these challenges in November. Even if he stays on the ticket, step aside the fact that members of Congress are coming out against him. I don't know how they campaign for him after that. But you've got Cook Political Report. They've moved a number of key races, 3 swing states, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, to lean Republican now. These are states that the president won in the last election, albeit they were very close then. How significant is this move from the Cook Political Report?
I think very significant. And I've spoken to a number of House Democrats, including one who thinks that Biden should step aside, but he hasn't gone public yet. And what he told me is he's waiting to see some of these post-debate polls, some more of these numbers, this data, to see if President Biden truly is a drag on the ticket, then that would be sort of the last straw and would lead them to then call on him to step aside. So Cook Political Report was sort of one of the first tastes of that. We're still waiting to see this full scope of numbers. A source said to me, sometimes it's difficult to poll over July 4th recess. People aren't around, barbecues, beaches.
I was definitely at the beach.
What have you. So I think that the polls are important, but also just going back to what Tyler was mentioning, that press conference tomorrow. I spoke to House Democrats today who said they are going to be very closely watching how President Biden performs. One of them said that he needs to shift the narrative from the debate. He needs to have an A-plus performance. And if it's anything short of that, it's going to be extremely damaging to his campaign.
I just wonder, where do the voters play in all of this? Because there are elected officials, there are donors, there are delegates who ran on slates and who are pledged. Then there's also the voters. What do the voters say?
I mean, if you look at the polling from the very beginning of this primary season, when there was a primary season, voters didn't want President Biden to run anyway, right? They thanked him for 2020. They wanted him in 2020 to be a bridge like he said he was going to be. But then 70%, sometimes 60%, sometimes 80% of Democrats wanted someone else. That was the entire point as we were, as they started kind of coalescing around him, the elites, as he said.
would like to also be a size 6.
Yeah.
Right now it's not a possibility. So are they saying they'll still vote for him?
That's the thing. So now you have a moment where voters are looking at it, especially the base of the Democratic Party, black voters. They're looking at, okay, we have 4 months until this election. Is it safe to do that, right? They're saying, we don't believe that Democrats are gutsy enough to actually do something like this. We are worried that if they do something like this, we don't know if Vice President Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or whomever would be better against Donald Trump, because they, just like the Biden camp believes, they saw him win in 2020. They think that he could win again. However, it's not showing up in the polling. So it's just kind of a mess. And the voters don't seem to be where the Democratic leadership and a lot of these Democrats that we're talking to are.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.